What is Paul's brain science of emotions?
Paul taught Gentiles, or wanted to teach Gentiles, how to handle their emotional lives like Jews.
And with that, we want to say hello. I'm Alexis Wagner. I'm the Marketing and Digital Education Director of Westar, and I'm talking to Thandeka today, who is one of our speakers for the spring meeting. She is a minister, a scholar, an author, recently wrote a book with Westar called Love Beyond Belief. So we'll be talking about that as well, and also more about her topic at the spring meeting, which, as we just alluded to, is the question, what is Paul's brain science of emotions? So to follow up on that, Thandeka, what do you think is the reason that you allude to in the description of your talk that the people that Paul was working with and living and communing with didn't seem to get what he was trying to do, or what you suggest that he was trying to do?
Great. Have you ever tried to change the way in which you feel?
Yeah.
As if you say, right now I'm angry, but I'd like to feel happy. And then you order yourself to feel happy, and somehow it doesn't work.
Sure.
So Paul noticed that his Gentile followers were emotionally amok. They were filled with rage and anger and doing all kinds of sinful, sensuous, sexual stuff. And he wanted to change the way in which they handled their emotions.
Yeah.
If they were triggered, he didn't want them to fire.
Mm.
So how do you teach people a new way of handling their feelings?
Mm.
That was his purpose.
Mm.
In this way, he didn't want to turn Gentiles into external Jews, that is, those who practiced circumcision and the rest. He wanted to change their heart.
Yeah.
How do you change someone's heart? The first thing you have to do is speak their language. You have to say, oh, I see you're angry right now. Well, yeah. So how are we going to handle this anger? What does it mean? And if I were a first century Gentile, I would say, well, I feel fear and trembling because I violated the oath to the gods. And even though I'm no longer, believe in gods, nevertheless, I know because I feel bad, I must have done something wrong and I'm going to be punished in the afterlife. That's why I have fear and trembling. And so Paul said, even though you feel that way, it doesn't mean that you've actually done something that's bad and wrong. So I'm going to show you another way to interpret your feelings.
And you suggest that perhaps the people that he was trying to do this with and alongside didn't get that necessarily, didn't understand that.
Right. If, for instance, I say to you, I see that you're really upset today. Now, I'm going to work with you so that you can interpret your feelings in a new way. That wouldn't quite make any sense to you, would it?
Yeah.
Why?
Usually in the moment, you probably want to feel the way that you feel. And stepping back doesn't sound good or easy or like it's going to help you feel what you're feeling.
Exactly, because what you're feeling is actually the case. It's real. Mm. It's not an interpretation. If you're angry, you're angry. It's not a narrative.
Right.
So if I step in and say, oh, this is an interesting narrative, let's look at this another way, it doesn't make any sense.
So what do you think that Paul was getting right about this that brings it into your own work and as you talk about with science and neuroscience and those sorts of things that the people weren't getting, but that makes sense that he was doing right, that we can identify with maybe?
He paid attention to their emotions, which is a foundational reference for religious experience. Religious experience takes emotions and turn them into religious feelings. So thus, how do you track a raw emotion like anger or rage and keep it and watch it turn into a religious feeling like regret or lamentation or sorrow and gratitude to the sacred for feeling released, freed, saved.
Mm.
So how do you take an emotion, any emotion, and turn it into a religious feeling?
Mm-hmm.
That's what contemporary affect theology is all about. It's a theology of emotion designed to track how raw emotions become religious feelings. That's the field that I've created, contemporary affect theology.
Yeah, I love that that emotions are the foundational reference for religious expression and
for religious experience, right?
Experience. I wrote down EXP in my abbreviated
experience, right? Because religious experience does not begin with doctrine.
Right.
It begins with feeling.
Right.
Across the board, you name a religion, a tradition, a faith tradition, and you're going to find something like how compassion is created or handled, or rage or anger. That's the common ground.
So within that, then, so do you see, I guess, kind of which comes first? So do you see like the emotional experience then needing to be fed into a religion or a specific religion? In Paul's case, kind of like maybe, teaching people, quote, how to be Christian versus, Jews and Gentiles? Or do you see it as like religion noticing that people have those feelings and taking them and turning them into some sort of need for this religion, if that makes sense?
Yes, both.
Okay.
In the following way. We'll start with an easy example. You have a little boy, and he is perhaps 6 or 7, and he starts to cry. And you say, "Oh, darling, boys don't cry." And then you slap him.
Oh.
Yeah. So what do you know? Within a few months, the kid never cries. He's filled with fury, to be sure, but he doesn't cry. So that's an exaggerated example. Unfortunately, a lot of kids are raised that way. But it's an easy way to understand how emotional feelings are altered. That's what religion does. It takes a feeling that you have and it affirms it, alters it, tweaks it, so that now you feel good about having the feeling or bad about having the feeling.
Yeah.
You feel good about being sexually aroused or bad about feeling sexually aroused.
Right.
That's what religion does. That's what spirituality does. So, Paul noticed that there was a great deal of lust and inappropriate sexuality among the Gentiles, and they felt fear and trembling. And even though they were now followers, brothers and sisters of the way, right, members of the Jewish sect, they nevertheless, some of them felt guilty about eating meat that had been dedicated to the gods.
Right.
And so they wrote him a letter saying, which is it? Should we eat the meat to the gods, dedicated to the gods, or should we not? You said we can eat any meat that we want to because there aren't any gods except God.
Yeah.
So what should we do? And yet you've said you shouldn't eat meat if some of the weaker brothers and sisters will feel as if they are being idolatrous. So which should we do? You've told us 2 different things. And he says, Paul responds, I'm not going to eat meat dedicated to the gods because some of the consciences of our weaker brothers will make them feel as if they have sinned. If they return to idolatry. And he said, you should not hurt the conscience of another person. Because Christ came to stop suffering.
Mm. Yeah.
So you must not cause other people to suffer.
Mm.
So even though it's all right to eat meat that's been dedicated to the idols, to the gods, I won't do it because I will not cause another person to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he begins. But then he says, okay, now let's look at your suffering, which is caused by your conscience, Senatus, by your conscience. So Paul is the first New Testament writer to use the term Senatus, conscience.
Mm.
And he uses it more than any other New Testament writer. Something like, 16, 18, I can't remember the exact number. Not very many times.
Yeah, wow.
And the term is only used less than 30 times in the New Testament. And he uses it more than anyone else, and he's the first one to use it. So he says, in this way, we should not cause the Senatuses, the conscience of another person, harm. We should not harm it, because if the conscience is harmed, the person who has that conscience will feel horrible. They'll feel guilty and shame. So he says, oh, but by the way, he says, sometimes what you feel, what your conscience makes you feel, isn't correct.
Sure.
Right? So, you're taking this core thing, conscience, and you're saying sometimes when your conscience is bothering you, Paul is saying it's wrong. You haven't committed a sin. You haven't done anything. Now, the Gentiles knew from their previous religions that when their conscience acted up, it's because they committed a sin against the gods. They violated some oath to the gods, and they would be punished. So Paul is saying, oh, no. That's not the case. So he takes this universal claim of the Gentiles that the conscience is an absolute relationship with the gods. And he says, oh no, it's a cultural narrative.
Interesting.
Now, he had to use their term, Senatuses, because that was the language of the people.
Yeah.
But what he tried to teach them was another approach to handling uncomfortable feelings, troubling feelings, evil inclinations, Yetzer hara, the Gentile term, the Jewish term, the Hebrew term, for evil inclinations. So, for instance, if you felt lust or greed or jealousy, those feelings in and of themselves, from the Jewish perspective, weren't bad or wrong.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't have lust, you wouldn't have kids.
Right.
If you didn't feel jealousy when you saw your neighbor farming and having lots of produce, you wouldn't become a more active farmer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's how you handle these emotions that's the issue, not the emotions themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Or from another perspective, a different Jewish sect, it was like, these aren't even human emotions. These are demons within you.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to get rid of those demons. Either way, whether they're emotions or demons, study Torah, pray, and with God's help, you'll be able to handle these emotions or these demons.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fundamentally different way of handling emotions or demonic forces than the Gentiles had, which is when they felt bad and wrong, they believed that they had done something wrong.
Yeah.
So Paul uses the Gentile term, Senatuses, to try to explain the Jewish concept. That your human nature is not bad and wrong. You haven't done something wrong, and that's why you're being punished.
Yeah.
But because he uses the Gentile term conscience, which makes the exact opposite claim,
Yeah.
every time he used the term, he taught them what he was trying to set aside.
Yeah.
And thus he became the discoverer of the conscience. He was what is he called? The hero of the Western conscience. Christopher Stendhal, the hero of the Western conscience. And that's what he was trying to set aside.
Huh.
So my book tracks how this linguistic era, if you will, of Paul became the emotional foundation for Western Christian faith, thanks to Augustine, a Gentile, who reads Paul's text on the conscience and says, yeah, that's what I've got. That's why I feel so bad and wrong. So he turns Paul into a Gentile with a Gentile conscience.
Yeah.
And then Luther, an Augustinian monk, one of the fathers of the Protestant Reformation, makes what has been called, creates the religion of conscience. That the conscience is the bride of Christ. Two evil forces trying to take hold of the conscience, Christ and Satan. All going back to Galatians and Romans.
Yeah.
Having nothing to do with Paul, but nevertheless, Paul now has given us the emotional foundation for hatred of the Jews. That is, the inner Jew, which is acting up, and therefore you have to get rid of that Jew. That's the bad Jew. Yeah. And so on it goes. The brain science of emotions, thus, goes back to Paul to retrieve his teaching that love beyond belief, not fear and trembling, are the emotional foundation for faithfulness to Christ and God.
Yeah. Well, and as I'm thinking and you're talking and I'm thinking of your book too, and how you frame it as hopefully a resource for a number of people, but also those who are spiritual but not religious, that kind of buzzword term that we hear a lot about. And I'm thinking out loud, so I'm kind of wondering too, like what you think about how all these different sects, denominations, whatever, have risen up within Christianity that even have some of these warring factions. Because as you're talking about, like the Jewish interpretation, say, of like lust, where, well, it's not bad because you need it for XYZ, and you have the Protestant, tradition of like what Paul was going for, lust is terrible, like if my eye causes me to sin, gouge it out, etc. Those sorts of dichotomies have arisen and are continually arising, even just within what is now, quote, Western Christianity. And so it's almost difficult to point to, like, even if you were truly in touch with Paul's teaching and your emotions, that would point to this one interpretation, because it almost seems like there are so many different interpretations of how you should interpret your emotion, although that probably wouldn't be the language that people would use, but to put it in these terms. And I'm just wondering, I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm wondering kind of like what you think about that just within one religion. There's now these multiplicity of feel bad or don't feel bad kind of things.
Wonderful. Great question. We have to keep in mind that there were two Pauls, Paul the Jew and Paul the Gentile. And it's easy to understand the distinction between the two if we imagine for a moment that we're kindergarten teachers. And so we'll say to our children, well, children, what are we going to do today?
Yeah.
The we, right, embeds her within, makes her a member of the class. And thus her first person singular becomes the first person plural. And all the children will act with her as if they are doing, because they are doing it together, but it's her directive. So what are we going to do today? So Paul speaks to the Gentile using as if he is also a Gentile. Oh, my mind wants to go one way and my flesh wants to go another way. Oh, help me, I am torn apart.
Yeah.
He's being the perfect Gentile there, miming what the Gentile conscience does to Gentiles. So we have Paul the Gentile. And then we have Paul the Jew saying, oh, by the way, this way of being torn apart is a cultural narrative.
Yeah.
But he doesn't give us immediate kind of Brechtian clues, like holding up a sign saying, okay, now I'm speaking as the Jew, now I'm speaking as the Gentile.
Yeah.
He doesn't give us those, he doesn't give us these kinds of clues. So we mush the two together, and one, he becomes the most controversial, most contradictory New Testament writer. And two, we turn him into a self-hating Jew who's trying as best he can to be a good Gentile with a Gentile conscience.
Yeah.
Because the two Pauls are squeezed together and the life of Jewish Paul is squeezed out of him. First by Augustine, who 4th, 5th century gives us the first official doctrine of human nature, which is the doctrine of original sin. It had been around before Tertullian and others, but he writes it up. It becomes a doctrine, official doctrine of the Catholic Church, saying that because of Adam's sin, we've all fallen, we're all our human nature is despoiled. And there is nothing we can do about it. It's up to Christ now to correct our fallen nature. And how do we know we're fallen? Look at the way in which we feel and act. Augustine's confessions. Even when I was a baby, wanting milk and screaming, selfishness. We're born bad, broken. So he makes that the official doctrine of the Catholic Church, linking it back to Paul the Gentile.
Yeah.
So too, Luther, who wrote a 350, 60-page doctrine called On the Jews and Their Lies, which Hitler used unedited.
Wow.
And Luther can trace this back to Paul the Gentile and the bad Jews. So what I've discovered with the help of the brain science of emotions, affective neuroscience, I've discovered, because when I asked the question, okay, how did Paul teach Gentiles to handle their emotions, interpret their emotions, narrate their emotions in a new way, using insights from the brain science of emotion, I was able to discover the Jew, the Paul that's been lost to so much of Western Christian history, which is Paul the Jew, who therefore, as I said before, said that Christ returned not because Gentiles were sinners, but because they were suffering. And he wanted to stop the suffering.
Big difference.
That's right. So the 1 in 4 Americans today who define themselves as spiritual but not religious, I argue, have discovered in this way the original intention and design of Paul's work, which is the law of love, the law of Christ, which I call love beyond belief.
Yeah. So
thus, spiritual but religious, but persons who are spiritual but not religiously identified, self-defined, have now biblical roots that are older than Christianity and Judaism. Paul.
And it kind of, it's a new perspective on Paul. I don't know how you want to frame it, but it definitely puts Paul in a new light as well, given, like you were saying, kind of him being one of those people that you sort of love to hate.
That's right. Without excusing him
Right.
for the linguistic error that created almost 2,000 years of Christian anti-Semitic and anti-Judaic sentiment, anti-Jewish and anti-Judaic sentiment and activity. So he's not forgiven the linguistic accident, but we can retrieve the other Paul and build a movement of love beyond belief.
Yeah.
That is doctrinally free, draws on different sources to explain the feelings, and allows us to experience, if you will, cosmic consciousness, the feeling of being inextricably interwoven with the world, with life itself, which for theists is God.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love it. Well, I am enticed to ask many more questions, but I don't want you to have to give your whole talk that people are going to be able to come see in the spring meeting, and we are also going to make it available via live streaming, so if people aren't able to come in person, they can still take advantage. So yeah.
One more point here in terms of persons who are in mainline congregations, Christian churches. They have a way now of retrieving what they've been looking for, but not knowing how to find, or even that they're looking for it, which is love beyond belief, as foundational for their Christian faith.
Yeah.
So they have a way of reaffirming love as foundational to their faith instead of hate or fear or trembling.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of that, having grown up in a environment more of the fear and trembling, I think it's a lot of that still stemmed from Paul. So how freeing, as you say, and redemptive, to use, Christian language, to be able to cast him in a new light without
that's right,
off the hook for some of the other stuff.
That's right. So it's a free Paul movement.
Yeah. I like it. Oh. Well, thank you again so much, Thandeka, for taking the time and explaining some of the stuff. And I hope it piques some of our members and our viewers, our listeners' interest, and that they will join us this March to hear more.
Thank you, Alexis. This has been delightful.
Great.